So, a few days ago, I decided that I'd keep going with my iconic game mechanic Godot remakes. And after Portal's famous Portals, which I talked about in this previous devlog video, I switched to something completely different and put on my rock and roll dev hat to redo Guitar Hero's core system. You probably know about this huge series of rhythm games that started back in 2005 and now counts a dozen of episodes, all about using your keyboard or even your guitar-shaped controller to replay the best you can the guitar tracks of plenty of world-renowned songs. And yeah, that's where those guitar tracks are simplified as 5 lines containing dots and dashes of color that each correspond to the buttons you need to press and hold to reproduce the original music. So for that new remake project, my goal was to see how much of that mechanic I could recreate in the Godot game engine in a couple of days. And overall, well, it actually went quite smoothly. Although there was one real headache that I didn't see coming. Oh, and just like last time for Portals, if you want to get the full Godot project for that Guitar Hero remake, then you can do like my most recent line member Remy and join my Patreon to get the project archive as this video is coming out. So yeah, be sure to head over there if you want to really dive in. Okay, but now before we get into the really brain twisty bit, let's go back to the beginning, and I'm gonna explain how I sort of remade Guitar Hero in Godot in 2 days, with even some extra features, like choosing the instrument you want to play. Now, since I didn't want any copyright issues when uploading this devlog video, I decided that instead of using real songs, I'd make my own, specifically for this project. What's also nice with using my own music is that I could change, cut, tweak and refine it bit by bit to my liking and really see how my original file translated to the game. I'm not gonna go into too much details about this here, cause this ain't a video about music creation. The important thing is that for this entire song production phase, I relied exclusively on virtual instruments from my DAW. Now, why is that? Well, because there's something great with virtual instruments. They're written in MIDI files. If you're not too familiar with the music world, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Basically, instead of recording actual sounds, MIDI records information about the music, which then allows us to transfer this abstract data to another computer and even another piece of software to reanalyze or replay it some other way. The stored information includes things like which notes to play, when to play them, how loud to play them, optionally what instrument to use, at which tempo, etc. So here what I did is that I exported my music as 2 different files. On the one hand, the guitar part inside a MIDI file, and on the other hand, the rest of the instruments as a standard wave audio. This way, back in Godot, I could overlap the two to recreate the entire music, except the guitar part was more detailed and could be parsed and analyzed, which in particular meant that I could identify what notes the player needed to play and when, which sounds a lot like a Guitar Hero track to me. But of course, cause MIDI doesn't store actual sounds, but just information, you can't simply put it in an audio stream and play it. You need to actually decode the data. Now, all in all, the MIDI format isn't super complex. It's a bunch of headers and data chunks that represent your original music important events, like set the tempo to this value, start playing this note, stop playing this note, etc. So I could have written my own parser to extract back the data from the MIDI file to my Godot project. But luckily, some other great Godot game devs have already done that for us, and there are a couple of MIDI add-ons in the Godot asset lib. Here I used this Godot MIDI player plugin from Arles 80 that has a lot of features and is really simple to use. Though for now, you'll notice that we only get events, we don't actually get sounds, and that's because once again MIDI doesn't store sound waves. So to actually translate all these events into sounds and get something audible, a common technique is to use your MIDI data along with a sound font. A sound font is similar to a text font, but for music. It's a big bank of sounds that all correspond to unique note pitch, and that a MIDI file can use to emit the right sound wave for its current note data. And good news, the Godot MIDI player add-on handles that natively. So I simply went online and found some completely free guitar sound font from this Reddit post, added it to my Godot project, and finally assigned it in the sound font property of my MIDI player node. And that was it. I now had sounds for every note in my MIDI file, and so in addition to replaying my original guitar part, I could actually follow what was happening in real time. which meant I had everything I needed to spawn those little dots and dashes in my game and have them slowly slide towards the front. So creating the notes in the 3D world followed quite logically from my first tests. In short, whenever I got this note event, I could instantiate a notes prefab in my game that would then automatically move at the right speed towards the camera to get closer and closer to a little input spot at the bottom of each line. I also computed the note durations to know if I should add trails or not, so if they were supposed to be held or just pressed once. For the note 3D models, I used Blender and I just completely copied Guitar Hero style. And when I spawned them, I just put everything in the middle of my fretboard play zone, ignoring the notion of line and colors. The only tricky thing at that stage was to have those note markers spawn ahead of the real note, so that you'd get enough time to see it arrive before having to hit it. But I actually found the solution in this nice quick video by Sam's Face. Instead of having just one MIDI player node, I had to use two. The first one would send its MIDI events and spawn the node objects, but it would be completely mute, and the second one would start sometime later along with the rest of the music to truly play those notes at the right moment. That was starting to look pretty cool, but of course I was still missing a fundamental thing. I had no idea what track I was supposed to put my notes on. And that question was actually a bigger roadblock than I thought. This is what I eventually spent the most time on. Because, yeah, if you know the first thing about music, it's probably literally that there are 7 notes: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol. And if you've ever seen a piano, you can probably guess that there are in fact a lot more when you take into account all the halftones and the octaves. So wait, how exactly are we supposed to cram every possible note pitch of a song in just 5 lines? I mean, surely even just one song isn't composed of just 5 notes, right? Well, no, it's not. And that's the trick. In the Guitar Hero games, the 5 lines aren't assigned to one note or one pitch. Those tracks simply represent the pitch going up and down. So in other words, a note in the lowest green line at the beginning of the song might be different from a note in the same lowest green line later on in the same song. Okay, that's cool. It solves our problem. We can have more than 5 notes in a song. But now we've got another problem. How the heck do we do that in our code? Now, the solution I found isn't perfect, but it does work fairly well most of the time, at least on my examples, and it relies on the concept of sliding time windows. In a nutshell, what I did is that I first used the Godot MIDI player add-on to get the entire list of notes in my song, from start to finish, and then I went through each one while looking at a small zone of notes around it, meaning the ones played just before and just after. This way, for each of these note zones, I could get the most efficient note-to-track matching, and then I could try my best to shift this matching in a discrete way throughout the song. Now again, there are still some issues here and there, but all in all, this technique allows me to get a playable song and somewhat visually logical rises and falls relative to the music. At that point, I finally had a playable rendition of my original guitar track with the rest of the instruments as a basic wave audio in the back. And all that was left to do in terms of gameplay was to check if the player was hitting the notes properly or not. And of course, I made it so that my second MIDI player, the one that really plays the guitar notes at the right moment, only plays those notes if we actually hit them. Then I also handled the case of the longer notes with trails, so that the player would keep scoring as long as she's holding the matching track input. Oh, and just to be sure I could get a feel for when the music starts, I also added a tick at the beginning of the song. At that point, the core feature was ready. So then, most of my dev time was spent on improving the atmosphere and the visuals of the demo game. I added some animations to my notes and my track inputs, I put some lights and VFX to really emphasize the notes and when the player manages to hit them, and finally, I worked on the environment. I first gave my guitar fretboard in the middle a custom texture with a shader to have it slide along with the rest of my elements, and I added fret objects to mark each bar of the music. And then, last but not least, I went back to Blender and used some geometry nodes to spawn this crowd of blobs on each side of the playzone. Then, to avoid this crowd taking a toll on the game's performance, I rendered it as a movie in Blender, I use the OGG format, which is the only one currently supported by Godot, and so finally I could display this movie in my game thanks to a video stream player node. The final improvement was to add some crowd cheering sounds at the very beginning of the song, whenever I hit my max score combo of 16, when I score a new additional 50,000 points, and at the very end of the music. So I was nearly done, and all that was left on my list was to do a main menu and also a score screen. What you pick in the menu is stored in a global shared data storage, and then reread by the game manager to know what MIDI files and sound font to load in the MIDI player node, and what wave file to load in the background music audio stream, which is the wave audio with everything but the instruments that you picked. After that, for my score screen, I transferred my score, combo and hit notes data from the game, and I displayed it in various ways, plus also I set up a few basic rules to compute a D2S rank. So yeah, at that point I had a playable basic Guitar Hero remake with even the possibility to pick your instrument, entirely powered by MIDI. This was a really interesting project to do. I'd been wondering about how this kind of rhythm game works for a long time, and diving headfirst into the implementation forced me to ask myself a bunch of questions I think I'd never thought of otherwise. But what do you think? Are this project and devlog interesting? Would you enjoy me making more of that kind of content? Again, don't forget that you can get the full project on my Patreon over here. And of course, you can check out this previous video to see how I remade Portal's iconic mechanic. But in any case, yeah, feel free to tell me in the comments down below if you'd enjoy more devlogs, and like, share and subscribe to see more game creation content. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and take care.